Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. We are home just as you are, and joining me is Ben Kinsley, who's co-host, co-sponsor, and co-producer. Ben, you want to give us a little 2-minute on your enterprise?
Sure. 2 minutes. All right.
Yeah, it's a lot of talking. Go for it.
I can fill 2 minutes. So my name is Ben Kinsley. I have a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors. We do a bunch of different things. Really started out as a policy research and development organization, and quickly realized it's not enough just to have a good idea. You also have to sell that idea. So from that, a whole bunch of different services kind of sprung out of that. Everything from strategic communications, government relations, social media, advertising, donor database, development, a whole bunch of different things. So if you have a nonprofit, work for a nonprofit here in Vermont, look us up. We can help you out, find your audience and connect with them. So imperiumvt.com.
Thank you, Ben. And our special guest today is Patrick Winburn, who is an attorney and is running as a Democrat for governor in 2020. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to finally meet you. I have seen your signs everywhere. I don't know how you got that done, but it was well done. They are all over the place. So congrats.
Well, thanks.
I think you're the only one almost out there. I haven't seen too many other signs, but that's a good thing for you. So there you go. Could you give us a little information about your background for our viewers?
Yeah, I'm a father of two and a grandfather of one. The two I'm afraid to say are in their 40s now, and I have one grandchild, Woody Winburn, and I have two dogs, Alfie, who people have probably met on my commercials, who's the better looking of the two, as you can see right now. And I've lived in Bennington County for 34 years. And, I practice law, and I've practiced law in Vermont since 1987. And I've been a member of the school board in Manchester, which is in Bennington County. And I served one term on the school board, and that was back in the 80s. And I've also been on the board of trustees of Old Bennington, the moderator of the Village of Old Bennington.
Nice.
I'm a past president of the Vermont Trial Lawyers Association. I'm a current board member of the Vermont Trial Lawyers Association, past president of the Bennington County United Way, the Bennington County Humane Society, and today I was talking to a local organizer for the Battle of Bennington commemoration, and I'll be their liaison to try to resurrect that. So it's an important battle.
Oh yes, for sure.
Yeah, but I'm married. I've been married to Kim, who I know you've met at least by telephone. We've been married for 38 years.
Good for you.
And 5 years ago, she was diagnosed with metastatic adenocarcinoma, which is lung cancer. And that was a serious diagnosis, and certainly she was told that she had 6 months to live.
Yes,
and
right.
But she, thanks to the doctors and some great immunotherapy medications that she's taken, she's now back in action. And they told her, well, Kim, you're going to die of something, but you're not going to die of this. And
that is really, she's got to be very strong herself, because that's not such a great diagnosis to have, for sure.
Yeah.
Good for her.
But she's doing well, and it makes you appreciate the medical people, and the doctors and the hospitals, and we had wonderful doctors.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's great.
So let's talk about a little bit about your campaign. You're running for governor. What do you feel? What prompted you to jump in the ring in what appears to be a fairly crowded field this year in terms of a number of folks that are vying for that position? So like, what was your motivation? What got you thinking? Like, what are your major or overarching goals?
Well, I believe that politicians should be the people their dogs think they are. I know we talked about our dog. Alfie's listening in, so he's giving me his look of approval. And I'm not a politician. I don't want to be somebody. Alfie and my wife Kim, they already think I am somebody. And I'm not running, I'm running to get things done. I've listed what my top priorities are, but one of the top priorities has to be opioid addiction and the opioid abuse problem. And it's far more pervasive, I think, than a lot of people realize. I'm fortunate not to have any, family member involvement in the problem, but I've seen it in my law practice that people have addictions, and it causes them to go do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do. I've talked to judges. I've talked to my own clients, and it's just a devastating, crushing problem that has to be solved. And there's no simple solution, but it has to be solved through court intervention, which is appropriate, mental health counseling, and some compassion, but at the same time, people that are selling drugs in a big way, they really need to be dealt with by the court system. And our own local judge, probate judge, Judge Scanlon, and I have talked a lot about that. I've talked to Chief Justice Reiber about it, who we used to practice law against each other. We were opponents in the courtroom, had trials against each other, but those were back in maybe the 1990s, and the same with Justice Eaton. But it's clear to me that is the opioid abuse is a huge problem. And Governor Shumlin a few years ago, I don't know if you'll recall, but he dedicated his entire inauguration speech on the issue of the opioid epidemic. And what's happened? Nothing. So it's another reason to run for governor, is to get something done, to quit talking about things and actually see some results. And I think a lot of the legislators have good ideas, and it's just a matter of having a governor who's not going to veto a lot of good ideas.
Great.
So
I'm sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Well, opioids seem to be a pretty intractable problem in Vermont, as well as the rest of the country. Are you familiar with the Icelandic model at all for addressing opioid abuse?
Well, I know that the Icelandic model and the Scandinavian model is one of mostly counseling, and they'll separate the people. They don't treat them like prisoners, but they are confined, and they're treated humanely, so that once they emerge from their confinement, they can be productive members of society. But they are confined, and then they're allowed to go home and go to jobs. But it's a more compassionate way of dealing with really what for the users is a mental health problem, but it is a very serious issue. it's something that has to be dealt with seriously.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Ben and I did an 8 video series shows on opioid addiction in Vermont with Jolinda LeClaire when she was in charge of the opioid committee for the governor. And I think that opened our eyes because it's everywhere. And I think almost every family, doesn't matter about status or money or whatever, I know some folks, and you'd just be surprised to know how many people are really dealing with this.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot of attention from our spoken wheel design and implementation of our structure. But I think you're right. It's got to be at the core. It's the individual's got to need the help, counseling, and I hope we're doing that well. I hope so, because with interfacing that with mental health, which is a huge problem in Vermont, it's pretty complicated, I think. So you've mentioned some other things. I've looked through websites and some articles and stuff. You talk about government transparency, which is a big thing for Ben and I, and we work for Campaign for Vermont. Criminal justice system, and obviously family paid leave and cost of living. Can you talk a little bit about government transparency, because that's a big thing for us?
Well, one of my issues is having government in the sunshine. We shouldn't have secrets from the people. You know, the people have the power, but the people don't have the power unless they know what is going on, and there should be transparency. There are a few things that should be held confidential. There's attorney-client privilege and confidentiality, and doctor-patient confidentiality, but there really can't be confidentiality between legislators and the people they're supposed to represent. It doesn't really make sense that should be permitted. Right. I know there's some restrictions on there, that are being dealt with, but I believe in government in the sunshine, and I think that it provides a lot better outcome for everybody to know what's going on.
Well, we sure agree with that. You also talked about criminal justice, and obviously with your background, you've got a lot of experience. I attended the VT Digger presentation they made at the Dudley Davis Center in UVM about justice reform. And it was a little scary, to tell you the truth, about where people's ideas are about women shouldn't ever be put in jail. That if you attack somebody if you kill somebody, the chances of your reoffending is very slim. I'm like, where do they get this stuff? So yeah. What are you looking at with regard to criminal justice reform?
Well, I mean, people who commit criminal acts, people who kill people, people who are, violent offenders, have to be dealt with in a swift and just way. It's mixed with compassion, and that's pretty much what our court systems are doing now. Most of the judges in Vermont are pretty highly regarded, and in my past, I've had cases against probably about half of the judges who are sitting Superior Court judges. So I know them, and I know how they think, and I know them, personally, but not at that, kind of level. But I think we're fortunate to have good judges in Vermont. And I think we're leaders in the field on some, issues, as you mentioned before. Right. But, I think that criminal justice reform it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing way of looking at what it needs to be done, and an ongoing way of applying, fairness to the people that have been, have been affected. But it also includes the victims of crime. Right, exactly. And the victims of crime, need a reasonable compensation for what they've been through, and that, generally is how the courts have dealt with it. Great, thank you. So, Pat, interesting calling you Pat, since my name is Pat. As I said before, I've seen your signs everywhere, and you've done TV ads. And I'm just curious,
Well, it's because everybody's home now. So I feel bad for people who are trying to run a campaign, especially like yourself, new people in the system, because you really don't have much of a chance to meet people in groups. So do you feel that you're getting exposure out there from your TV ads? And obviously I noticed your sign, so I'm sure other people are too. How are you approaching this candidacy?
Well, I only have one way of approaching everything, and that's straight ahead.
Good.
Yeah, we have been campaigning through use of yard signs, and also through the TV commercials and social media. And I know I should mention this, winburn2020.com. That's
Absolutely.
my website. I'd like for people to look at that. It has, a lot of detail about what the campaign's about my issues. Has my full resume from the time I was maybe 30 years old until now. Yeah, if anybody wants to see that, it is a tough thing to get your name known, and I've been I've been very happy to see that people do see the signs and that they do see the commercials. And several weeks ago, before there was social distancing involved, I was walking into stores and shops in Burlington, and they go, "Hey, you're the guy with the dog,"
Cool. Excellent.
So
You can't lose with the dog.
No, and well, that's that's why I would say that Alfie's the one who's better looking, because as you can see, this face is probably not going to win a lot of votes.
Well, that's
Alfie,
a lot of
though,
experience. That's what, right?
Well, that's true.
There you go. Yeah, dogs, you can't fight dogs. That's a great icebreaker. But because today you can't shake hands and kiss babies, for heaven's sake. So you're sort of limited.
No.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, that's why commercials and events like the one you're putting together here are important. Allows people to see the candidates up close and personal, and judge for yourself what kind of person they are.
Yeah, I must say I feel really committed to getting as many candidates on as I can because of what's happening out there. There's not much chance for them to do the things that we normally expect. No door knocking, no nothing. But anyway, so Ben, you want to take it away?
Yeah, there's a couple other, policy things that we've talked about, that set you apart from some of the folks that you're running against for governor. You've talked about universal health care coverage, as well as paid family leave. What are your thoughts? Vermont, I think right now is sitting somewhere around a 97.5% healthcare coverage rate. Of course, that's a mix of public payers and private payers. So it's a pretty colorful mosaic of different folks that are shouldering the cost for that healthcare coverage. What are your thoughts about where we should be going as a state?
Well, I think that healthcare is a right, and it's our moral responsibility. I know that, if I saw someone, or if anyone saw someone walking down the street and they fell over and they're laying on the sidewalk, the first thing people would do would be to rush over to try to help them and to call 911. I mean, here in Bennington, you can't, that just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't matter whether people are Republicans or Democrats or what party they are. People are basically compassionate human beings. And to deny somebody just basic health care or any kind of health care, it's not right, and it's not moral. I mean, my wife, when she was diagnosed with cancer, if we have health insurance through Blue Cross through the office, and I also provide health insurance for the people that work here in the office, who are my employees, and one of them is about to have a baby. I mean, how do you how do you tell people no, you can't have health care? And there is a funding element to it. And there's no doubt about that. But my funding that we've had allowed my wife to have the immunotherapy drug, and it's called Opdivo. And they told us it was about $250,000, to pay for that. And so these are the choices that people are having to make. Do I want to, I mean, in some cases, I would sell. Do I have to sell my house, or am I going to live or have my spouse be alive? Those are choices that are not really. Those are not right. And so I think, really healthcare does come down to being a moral issue. And, but it's, there's a funding element too. It seems that on the federal level, people are talking about healthcare for all, Medicare for all, Obamacare. I think they'll sort things out on a federal level, but here in Vermont, we've had Dr. Dinosaur, which I've seen do a lot of good things for kids. So why not Dr. Dinosaur for adults too? And people in Vermont are nice. That's one thing that distinguishes. It seems like, or maybe it's just because we live in Vermont. I don't know, but it seems like people in Vermont are nice, and it's really kind of at odds with the basic values that people in Vermont have to deny people health care, and that should not happen.
I agreed. That's great. I have to ask you, you made two comments about our governor. Of course, he hasn't announced he's going to run. Everybody's just assuming so. But you said that Governor Phil Scott has been standing in the way of good ideas coming out of the legislature. And then you said you depicted the governor as a water bottle. And I just wanted to talk about those two things, about why do you see he's standing in the way, and why is he a water bottle? I love it. What is that?
Well, I'm not saying he is a water bottle, but I mean, it's, well, it's, that's one of the ways of looking at it. It's that the water bottle's full of good ideas. There are a lot of senators in the state house that have had some really good ideas for a long time. The family leave is a family value. That barely, family leave barely was defeated, and it was defeated because of Governor Scott's veto. And then they couldn't override the veto. And, clean water, electric cars, health of our environment, all of those things. There are a lot of really good ideas that have already been proposed, and they seem to get talked about year after year. But if you have a governor who is the third branch of government, if the governor is going to veto everything, then the governor is sort of like the stopper on the water bottle. I mean, my election would be the result would be you pull the stopper out, you let all the good ideas flow, and people need to talk about things. Everybody, Republicans, Democrats, everybody needs to talk about things, but it's only so much time. I mean, it's only so much time you can talk about the same thing over and over. Otherwise, what's the point of having people in Montpelier?
Right, exactly. You mentioned water. We haven't heard much about water quality at all. Of course, this year, everything's been put on hold because of the COVID-19. But although they were talking about Lake Champlain, and now you don't hear anything about it. And the same with healthcare. We were going to, redo the healthcare system, and nobody's talking about it, which is making me very concerned about what, all of a sudden we're going to wake up and go, yikes. We need to do something.
Yeah, I think, a lot of these, you look at the state resources right now, and, even before the economic crash, things were, moving along at a decent clip, but still revenues were, growing at 2.5%, 3%. It's not like we were going gangbusters on the revenue side. And you have all these competing priorities, and you got to figure out, do we spend it on water quality? Do we spend it on healthcare? Do we spend it on education? Like, what buckets should that funding go towards? And those aren't always easy decisions. And once, of course, you've already funded one program, it's really hard to take dollars away from it, even if strategically that's the better decision.
Well, the water quality issue, if we don't fix it, the feds are going to come in and fix it. And I bet we pay for whatever they do. They're not going to pay for it.
They're going to figure out a way to make us pay for it.
Yes. So we don't even have any control over what they're going to do. But Lake Champlain is an economic driver for the whole state, not just Chittenden County. So I'm very concerned about that.
Well, the other thing, too, that's almost as concerning as the EPA coming in is at a certain point, you could have a class action lawsuit against Vermont from the New York side of the lake because we trashed it, and it's impacting their side. They're what we do affects them, and what they do affects us when it comes to water quality. So there's some real risk there, not just from the EPA, but from homeowners on the New York side of the lake.
Yep. So, Pat, we've been talking about some things, and I'm sitting here thinking that's what you're going to be facing if you win. There are some huge, just monumental issues that are going to have to be solved next year. That may be one of the more difficult years to come in as a governor. You've got the budget, you've got the economy, you've got the pension liabilities, which we're always talking about on this show, and all of the impact of COVID-19. Water quality. Where do you get started?
Well, you have to start somewhere. My proposal, that I'm sort of the overview of what it is that I intend to do, is to reshuffle the deck, to have a new deal. Franklin Roosevelt back in the 30s, after the Depression, which people were saying it's going to be that bad, but you have to have a new deal. You have to give people you have to give people hope. Tomorrow is going to be a better day, and this virus is going to be eradicated, and and we will still be here, and we need to move on. But that's one of the things that we have to do is the deck of cards was made in the last century, and we all got dealt a hand, and some got a good hand and some got a not so good hand, but there were winners and mostly there were not winners, and that was then, and this is now. So this is 2020. So what I would do as governor is to reshuffle the deck with the cards face up, and we'll throw out all the jokers and we'll reshuffle the deck democratically. Everyone through their elected representatives will have their say, and then we'll reshuffle the deck, and we'll do it freely and fairly, fair and square, and we'll all get a new deal. And that's the American way. That's the Vermont way. And I think that people have to take a new look at everything, and some things have worked and some things haven't worked, but mostly things need to be looked at again from a 21st century standpoint, because if we don't get on the fast train to the 21st century, we're going to be left behind. And I think that will be a plan that is doable, and that's a plan that we need to have in Vermont.
Great.
So from a policy perspective, what does that mean for the types of policies we should be looking at today, that can have an impact on reshuffling the deck?
I'm sorry, you cut off there, I think. I didn't hear the last part.
So what kind of policies should lawmakers be looking at today for reshuffling the deck? What kind of tools are we looking at for that?
Well, one way of looking at it is that is minimum wage. $15 an hour is they've been haggling over whether it's going to be $12 or $12.56 or $10 or whatever. And, I've made a pledge publicly that if I'm elected governor, that I will not accept more than $15 an hour as the governor of the state of Vermont in my public capacity until the hardworking people of Vermont get a raise to $15 an hour. And that was really, really close this past session that we're in. And, that's my pledge. I'm not going to raise, I'm not going to give myself more than the hardworking people of Vermont. So until $15 an hour becomes the minimum wage in Vermont, I'm not going to accept more than $15 an hour. I haven't heard anything from Governor Scott about that, but I think he ought to take the pledge too. I mean, he won't, but he vetoed it. But still, it's just a matter of fundamental fairness.
Maybe you should challenge Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman to pledge that he's going to pay all his farm workers $15 an hour as well. So something that is interesting that is we kind of get to see a little bit of in current events is what some of these policies actually might look like. Everyone's kind of getting a taste of what universal health care in some sense looks like, what guaranteed income looks like to some extent, and is an interesting world that we're living in at the moment. And we get to see what some of these policies might actually look like. And also, to your point, we've also learned what the most important jobs in society actually are. And it's not what we thought they were.
Well, it's going to be hard to argue against livable wage, and after what we've been through, where we recognize that people need money to survive and need the right amount to survive. So I think we've sort of been answering our own questions from last year. I would be interested next year to see what comes on the board, because
there's a bill going through the legislature right now to give emergency pay to frontline workers,
right,
folks who are working at grocery stores or gas stations or food service, and any of those people that are still working and are deemed essential workers.
That's great. There's a sign shop in Barrie. We went out last night, and they have all of these free signs that say thank you to our firefighters, thank you to all the essential personnel. So I picked up a couple of signs, and I'm going to put them on my lawn. They were free, and I thought, how cool is that? That's great. I thought they did that. So Pat, this is a question that, if I had to do it over again, I would go to attorney school. I'd become an attorney, because most corporations that I know, the people at the head are attorneys. And I think it's the way you get taught how to think about things. I may be wrong here, but I think it's how they teach you in school how to think through an issue and how to come to a solution. And do you think that being an attorney would help you in being a governor?
Well, I think so. I've been an attorney for so long, I don't remember how not to think like an attorney. I've been an attorney since 1980, and I have an active practice, but I'm not a Wall Street lawyer. I'm a Main Street lawyer, and my address is 409 Main Street, and I think most lawyers in Vermont are Main Street lawyers. Right. But I also have tried a lot of cases in front of judges and juries. Back in the old days, we would have called it being Perry Mason. And that's, now it's somebody else, I guess. But I think, the success that I've had in courtroom and trying in excess of 75 jury trials to verdict, the reason I've had the success is because I understand how people think, and I don't have to understand how they think because I think the same way. And I try to, explain my client's situation, as how they would understand the situation to be, and knowing the people that are on the juries. And so I think it does give you a way to critically analyze problems, but also then to interpret it in a human way, so that people will understand what the issues are, and how people should what decisions they should make in their own lives.
Well, I'll follow that question up. You have a list of your accomplishments, if I may embarrass you for a minute. You're listed in Best Lawyers in America. You are listed in the Super Lawyers of New England, and this is the one I like the most. You are a member in the $1 Million Advocates listing, which means that you have received you've received verdicts in excess of $1 million. Sign me up. We could find something you could represent me. I mean, that is amazing. So kudos to you. That's a great tribute to be on all of those winning lists.
So something you said that I think is really interesting. You said that you would like to be like Senator George Aiken, who many people revere. He's kind of always pointed to by a number of different folks in Vermont as the ultimate civil servant. Can you walk us through, what you see in Senator Aiken, and what about him you would like to emulate?
Well, the Republicans that I know in Vermont, they're not Trump Republicans. They are more George Aiken Republicans. Or, we've had quite a few, Republicans that are not extreme in their views. And I don't want to bore you, but I have a copy. I'm not selling a book, but
there you go.
I have a copy of Governor Aiken's book. And he was a U.S. senator for a long time, and he always insisted on being called governor because he was really a man of the people. And he was, somebody who was plain speaking, who would tell it like it is. And he didn't mind a challenge. He actually ran the first time he ran for Congress. He got beat because he took stands on local school issues. And I think people can see who is genuine and who just wants to talk. And I think that George Aiken, epitomized those roles. His father, was a bull mooser, back in the Teddy Roosevelt days, and he was independent. Bernie is independent. Bernie Sanders is technically an independent, and he ran for the Democratic, Party's ticket. But we've had a long streak of very independent, very interesting, and very down to earth people, and we're lucky to have somebody like George Aiken, who I'm not sure everybody remembers anymore, but he is somebody to emulate.
Some of us were very good friends with his wife, Lola, and she always referred to him as governor. She always said, the governor. And I think she and he must have shared the same sort of ideas and stuff, because we used to have some great conversations. She was an amazing woman. But
yeah, that looks like a first edition. You're gonna have to tell me where you got that.
Yeah, that looks great.
Well, they're not. I don't think they're. This is. Let's see. What edition would this be? It's got some Scotch tape that's still. It's turned marvelous. That's pretty old, but well, he was he was there for the Depression. He was there for World War II. He was there for all of the 50s and the 60s, and people. His solution for Vietnam was, well, let's just declare victory and go home.
Go home, right?
and yeah, people were talking about Vietnam, what to do, and we had you had a lot of soldiers in Vietnam, and he just got tired of hearing everybody talk about it, and it was fairly obvious that we shouldn't have been there to begin with, and that we had to get out. And so all these people's lives could have been spared had they listened to Senator Aiken.
Nice.
And declared victory and went home.
Right.
So.
Very good. There's another legislator that you seem to talk about a lot is Senator Dick Sears, who you said policy-wise, if you want to know how I think, look at Dick and how he votes. And he is certainly a figure to be reckoned with in the State House. Yeah. He runs a mean committee, and he's very good at what he does, for sure.
Well, and he runs the Judiciary Committee, which is particularly relevant. Yeah.
What's his other committee? Do you know, Ben? Because they're on two. What is his other one?
I'm not even sure what his morning committee is, but
yeah, because his committee his Judiciary Committee is run like clockwork. It's a really great committee.
Oh yeah. He's got a pretty tight grip on the reins.
Yes, he does. So do you work closely with him, Pat, or just sort of admire him from afar?
Well, he used to be a selectman here in Bennington, and so I first met Dick in 1992, and he was on the select board at the time, and I was along with Ray Bolton, who was the state attorney at the time.
Oh, right.
We were both chairs of the United Way campaign for Bennington County, so that's how we met.
Nice.
And Dick is a very good, big-hearted, decent guy. If you know Dick, you know that he's a very compassionate and a decent human being.
Yes,
but on a lot of the hot topic issues like taxing pot, if pot's going to be legal, one of Dick's bills says then we should tax it, just like we tax alcohol, hard liquor.
Right.
And, that is one of the solutions for, it's not the solution, but it's one of the solutions for the property taxes being so high in Vermont. And, so I think Dick takes bold positions, but at the same time, he tries to work within the system. But I think Dick's frustrated too. He'd like to see things get done, and he'd like to see Vermont be an even better place.
Right. Yeah, the legislature has changed over the years, just how you work together or not. When I was in the legislature a few years ago, and everybody worked together, and we would say the best bill is the third bill, your bill, my bill, and the compromise bill. But that doesn't happen very often, and I bet Dick is a little frustrated because it's changed a lot, and I hope it goes back to the way it was. But who knows?
Forward.
Yeah.
So you mentioned education spending there a little bit in the context of marijuana taxes. So you do have some ideas around education funding. Of course, this is a monumentally complicated issue, similarly to healthcare funding. And you were also said you were on the school board in Manchester, which is an interesting town to be the school board on. Manchester has school choice, and they have a public, well, it's a private public high school, essentially, is what it is. What are your thoughts around education and education funding in Vermont, and how do we address some of the property tax issues that we've had?
Yeah, well, you're right. It is a monumentally complicated issue. I was on this is back in the late 80s. I was on the school board, but I was also a member of the BRSU, the Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union. So, in Vermont, we operated through a supervisory union system. And, you've got a problem because some people, if you're in a small town, you have a bigger vote on the BRSU than you do. Say like Manchester would have 2 members on the BRSU, which I was a member, and so would Rupert. And everybody deserves to have their say, but I challenged that, and I took it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and wasn't successful, but the challenge was a success in opening up the issue of whether or not, the one person, one vote constitutional mandate is something that should be enforced. Unfortunately, the Second Circuit Court of Appeal did not rule that way. But as far as the school system in general, the people want to preserve the old Vermont, and they want to preserve the small schools. But sometimes, the large schools can provide a lot more education. They can provide a lot more benefit, really, for the students. It can be more organized and be regulated. And I think that the problem of paying for it is always going to be a problem, but I do think there's some more creative ways of dealing with the issue. One of the other things that relate to that is getting new people into Vermont. The population is going down in Vermont. All of us who've been here for a long time, realize that a lot of the people we knew growing up aren't here anymore. They're not paying taxes anymore. And if you don't replace those people with new people, it's almost like a chicken and the egg, kind of a problem. You need, Vermont employers need workers, and we have to be more willing to accept immigrants, legal immigrants to come into Vermont that will be hard workers. My ancestors were immigrants. All of our ancestors, except for Native Americans, were immigrants, and people have to be more open to that idea because they're very talented people, and there are people who have a lot to contribute to Vermont and would make Vermont a better place. But the more people you have, the more taxes that are being paid, the more jobs there are, the more money people make, and their lives are better. And I think it's important to see the big picture on all of this.
And this seems to be a cornerstone of your communication strategy, is this immigration piece. You've tried to float it in the media a couple times, I think, where you're trying to find. It seems like you're trying to find something that sets you apart from some of the other candidates, and this is one area that other candidates really haven't talked about at all. So something that does seem to set you apart a little bit, talking about this immigration aspect to trying to grow Vermont's economy and as well as our school system, because that's kind of directly related to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Governor Scott, in his last address on the budget not long ago, that's the only thing he got a standing ovation for, was that we need to open up more opportunities for legal immigrants here in Vermont. And what's happened with that? Nothing. And part of it is that the Trump's policies are so restrictive. He's just cut off all immigration, according to the last message that we got from the president. It sends a really bad message to people that want to move here and have, a lot of people from other countries have degrees, a lot of medical degrees, a lot of doctors, a lot of very highly skilled technical people. And I think it's something that you just really shouldn't continue to talk about. Just do something. And I think that the numbers of people that we're allowing to come in from other countries, that gets politicized and then nothing happens. But I think that is one solution, is the expansion of the tax base in order to be able to afford to do all the things that we need to do for education and other things.
Something.
Oh, sorry, Ben.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I worked for Governor Douglas, he and I think it was Senator Leahy, they worked very hard with the federal government to try to get get immigrants to come in and to do our farms, particularly up north, legally, to actually have some kind of a program just for them, as they do with the apple pickers down in Middlebury. When they come in from Jamaica, they're here under a legal program, but it just didn't go anywhere. And I think Vermonters are open to legal immigration. I really do. I think they understand the importance of it, and they all have big hearts, as you said. I think it's the illegal stuff that maybe needs to be thought about a little bit more seriously. But I know they tried really hard to get the farmers help that they needed legally.
Yeah.
It didn't go anywhere, and I don't know why. But,
yeah, one of the things that we have talked about with Campaign for Vermont for a few years is bringing in international students into our school systems who are paying tuition, right? So there's public schools that are doing this pretty much in every state in the country, a few that are doing it here in Vermont now, but really kind of putting more structure around that. And of course, a lot of those people aren't coming here right at the moment, but there's a lot more demand out there for access to U.S. education systems, particularly for high school, junior, and seniors. Internationally, and from countries like China and Europe and India, and a lot of these countries that have competing economies to ours, and they want access to American higher education, and getting in and getting a year or two of high school before they start applying to U.S. colleges is a huge advantage for those students, even if it's a public school. So there's some opportunities there to open up the doors, not just for workers, but also for students.
and I think there's a lot of support as we've gone around talking about that, Ben. There's a lot of support for that idea to push it forward. It would make sense.
Totally.
Yeah. So Pat, I read just one more issue that I wanted to talk about is your position on guns, because you have mentioned that in some of your writings here and there.
I'm sorry. The last sentence cut off. I couldn't hear what you said.
Your position on gun issues and what we should do going forward in this state.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a family where hunting was part of what we did. I used to go hunting with my father and my brother, and so when people start talking about guns, I think it's really a cultural issue. I think of all the good times we had going out in the woods and having a good time, and I think that it is something that culturally has to be understood by everybody, that it has a different sort of connotation to people like me. I had a BB gun when I was in grade school. It was my brother's BB gun, and he had a 22, so I wanted a 22, and then he got a 410. I wanted a 410, but instead of a 410, I got a 10 gauge, and I shot that. I used to do target practice too, but I shot the 10 gauge, and it just knocked me on my rear end. But on the other hand,
shotguns going straight to a 10 gauge.
Well, I didn't know what I knew. I actually and through the through like wildlife camp and 4-H, I was trained in how to properly care for guns and not to aim them at people, and not to, how to squeeze the trigger when you're aiming at targets. But my brother is a very good hunter, and my father was a good hunter. My grandfather was a hunter, and I think that it has to be understood in that kind of context. But I've also seen, I have served as it's a substitute position, but as a Superior Court judge here in Bennington County from time to time, just a couple of occasions. But somebody threatens your life and they say they're going to put a bullet in your head, those people need to be taken care of, and you can't really allow that. There are red flag laws that exist in other states, and people do get drunk and do bad things, and they should be held accountable for it. But you can't have people, doing those kind of things and say that that's okay. I mean, the Second Amendment has been ruled on by the U.S. Supreme Court, and but it doesn't mean that it can be, you can do whatever you want to do. And people, especially at this time, I've heard the rates of suicide. People have to be careful, and there's somebody who's at risk, have some reasonable intervention by the court and by mental health counseling, and try to prevent that from happening too. But guns don't kill people. People kill people, and you've got to look at it in the more complex way that it really is in reality. And I think if people take the time to understand and to think all of that through, I think most people would agree.
Yeah. We agree. Getting hit by a car is just as deadly as getting hit by a gun. Well, for more or less. But yet we allow people to drive all the time. We license them, and there obviously are consequences if you, make a mistake or whatever. But it's a tool. You can't put a firearm on trial the same way that you can put a person on trial, right? You don't hold that object accountable for what the person did.
We're still one of the safest, aren't we? From first or second in the nation, we still are right up there with being the safest state with regard to guns. Pat, you got, as Ben said before, you've got a couple of opponents, and I was just curious what you think you will bring from a fresh perspective and from skill perspective, what you'll bring to the table different than they will be bringing that would give people an incentive to vote your way.
I'm not a politician. I mean, I was on the school board, and I don't. Anybody who's been on the school board, that it doesn't really count. It's not that I've never been elected anything in Montpelier. I serve the people in Old Bennington as a moderator, and we deal with issues like repairing or not repairing the sidewalks and things like that. And the fresh perspective that I would have is that I am not a politician. I haven't been in Montpelier for all these years. I don't see that as a stepping stone to some other office and then run for another office. I think it does give you a different look and a different perspective on things.
That's great. And I commend you for being on the school board. Somebody asked, I was on the select board in my town, and somebody asked me to be on the school board. You have to really study to every one of those meetings. You've got to do some serious studying and know what they're talking about, because it's very complicated.
It's a lot of work involved.
Yeah, it is. I'd rather have the select board. It's not quite the same. I like it.
We are pretty much at time. So, Pat, is there anything that you want to say in closing remarks here? Why people should consider you as a candidate, and also, of course, remind us what your website is.
Well, it's winburn2020.com, and it has the issues. It has a sampling of the commercials, the advertising, the other things that also talk about the issues. It has my, it's Government in the Sunshine on a website. It's got my resume of everything that I've done over the many years, I'm always happy to have some help. Anybody who would like to donate their time or their money, or would like to put up a yard sign, I'm always happy to talk to anybody. My website is winburn2020.com. My telephone number, I'm in the book, but it's 802-447-0100. That's my office number. And my cell phone is 681-5424. And I'm certainly always available and always happy to talk to anybody.
Great. Thank Thank you very much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Nice to meet you sort of in person. Is this in person? Who knows? But anyway, thank you also to our viewers for listening in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites. See you.